Hi everyone, I'm Tatiana Badaro. I'm a fellow at the Federal University of Bahia, and I research into influence or civil persuasion in religious environment, more specifically these uh, cases, court cases, legal cases involving religious abusers, so-called religious leaders who actually are abusers. I was in a cult for 12 years, and that was what ultimately put me into that field of research. I had to understand the science behind it, the theory involving undue influence and all of that, because I couldn't get to make a complaint. I used to go to um, police districts and precincts, and it didn't matter if it was a precinct specialized in violence against women or general precinct. They used to tell me I had nothing to complain. It happened that way because Brazil doesn't have a legislation that address this kind of crime. We don't have it. We actually don't have research or researchers talking about it. What we do have is a lot of cases. Weekly, we get to the news, and you will see four, sometimes even more cases of abuses that happen inside religious environment. But mostly, the abusers walk free. And they walk free because what our magistrates are doing is using their prejudice and the complete lack of technical information to make decisions. So I will try to talk about this subject, talk about what happens in Brazil, our cultural identity, and what we are doing with these cases and with the victims. Use one case to as an example. We couldn't, in this short amount of time, analyze the 5 cases I use as basis of my research, but we will take this one as example. So the context is the abuser's name is Ícaro Medeiros. He's also known as Ike, and Ike has created a community called Comunidade Afago. He denied that this community was a religious community. He says it was a self-improvement, holistic community, a place where people would go to find a new family, find people that were chasing the same goals and the sort. Ícaro was pointed for by more than 30 people. More than 30 people made complaints about Ícaro, saying that he abused them sexually, physically, but mostly psychologically. But Ícaro was found not guilty. And why? That's the main point. The judge said, and it was last year, the judge said that Ícaro's so-called victims were people with an average education, that were born in a big city, and thus they couldn't be manipulated. You see, that's what happens when you don't have research, when you do not discuss those crimes in a theoretical and scientific um, approach. So the judge and the community, the society, will use their own beliefs, not on their own beliefs, but also their prejudice. They base all their decisions, all their criticism and analysis purely on what they think about it. And they think not because they made some study about it. They think because they were taught to think that way. So what identifies Brazilian culture on that subject is that only very vulnerable people, vulnerable economically, vulnerable intellectually, vulnerable emotionally, could be deceived. You could not deceive someone with economic stability, with a good job, with a good house, um, and a health family. That's what people believe in Brazil. And that's very problematic, because they used to say, how could that person or those people be deceived? How could they be fooled by some con man? And the thing is, when you do that, you focus on the victim. You put the victim on the shoes of the person responsible for the violence, for the abuses. You make the victim feel like they are responsible, like they are the true criminals. That's what Brazil is doing to its victims. That's what our legal process do. But I think we have to discuss is the emo. And I know that here, all of you already heard a lot about it. You heard from people who studied undue influence and coercive persuasion for over 3 decades, for over um, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, uh, all their adult life studying and researching and discussing so-called religious environment, sects, cults, and the violence they do to their followers. But in Brazil, it's not true. In Brazil, we do not research that. We don't talk about that. And if you make a complaint, you will hear that you're trying to do something bad. It's not good. You are trying to gain attention. You're trying to hurt someone. You are betraying your leader. That's how you will be seen here. And that's because we don't talk. Our culture is a culture of silence. I know people don't think that about Brazil, but that is true. Our culture is a culture, not a cult, I'm sorry. Our culture is a culture that doesn't allow the victims to speak up. They think that you have to swallow your pain and keep going with your life no matter what. You will be seen as problematic or someone not worthy. You will be seen as weak to go ahead and do a complaint and make a complaint. But going back to Icaro, when the judge found he wasn't guilty because the victims couldn't be fooled, what does it say? Why are we criminalizing victims? Why aren't we talking about vulnerability, real vulnerability? Because everyone can be fooled. Because those so-called religious leaders, they create the perfect environment. They are experts in finding small, really small breach in your protection, a really small vulnerability, and they make it huge. They turn their victims into puppets. They can manipulate all the surroundings. So the victim will be drowned in their doctrine, in their dogmas. And we will lose sight of reality. But the judge doesn't know that. The judge that said that Icaro isn't guilty, he didn't analyze Icaro. He didn't analyze the community he created. He didn't analyze Icaro's speech, his narrative. He didn't analyze nothing of that. He just focused it on the victims. And that's what Brazil is doing. Brazil is making victims feel like they are to blame, that we are, because I was a victim, not from Icaro, I was a victim for another abuser, Jair Tessio, who is on the run, is nowhere to be found, and we are still having the court hearings and everything, so there isn't a decision yet. But my culture, Brazilian culture, is formed by a broad corpus that implies a habitus that can lead to really absurd decisions. In other words, it is not possible. It is not possible to fight undue influence and persuasive coercion in Brazil if we don't start talking about, if we don't start address the issue. People don't like to address this issue here. Icaro used to bury his victims, bury them alive as a ritual. And he used to say that this ritual was to the person to rebirth, have a rebirth. It was like the person was dying to the material world, this profane world, and would be born again as a spiritual being. So he had a systematic attack on the person, the victim's identity, and he used, as usual, to target all support network his victims could have. But I just thought it was all the victim's choice. It was about religions of freedom, freedom of religious. I'm sorry, I got confused here, and freedom of creed, of belief. But the thing is, it wasn't a true religion. It wasn't a true belief. It was just the scheme of a criminal. So why my culture, why Brazilian culture tries so hard to keep victims in silence? We saw the Me Too movement all over the world, and it reached Brazil, and many women around the country are now making complaints about their abuses in domestic violence cases. But when we call to religious cases, to religious leaders, especially men, we can't talk. We can't talk because those gurus, those leaders are still considered out of reach. There's a huge taboo here, huge taboo. And it makes the magistrates in our legal process to focus and put the victim on the center of everything, every discussion. So if you go and say, I was abused, like I was, for 12 years, they would ask you, why? Couldn't you say it was violent? Why? Weren't you feeling uncomfortable? And if you were, why didn't you quit? Why did you stay? What did you do? Who did you talk to? How did you behave? How did you meet him? Why did you go there? And a lot of other questions, all focused on the victim, which is violent, which is cruel, and it's stupid because it doesn't address the real issue. It protects the criminals because we can't even make a complaint. You have to fight to have a complaint registered. And I'm just trying to explain the environment. I didn't even begin to talk about how often this happens. And when you go to a public ministry and you try to make a complaint, you will be pushed here and there because no prosecutor, no DA will want to take a case of okay, not no one. I know just a few who are great. I know 4 maybe in Brazil for now that actually address these cases with the seriousness that it deserves and it needs. But usually they would say, I can't do nothing. I don't deal with this kind of crime. So they will push you to the domestic violence competence, and there they will say it wasn't a family, and you will be pushed to another prison, and you'll be pushed to another prison, and nothing will happen because on the end of the day, they just don't want the trouble. They don't want to be the judge or the prosecutor that will question someone with a good status. Some man with money, with social, some social status, and I don't want to address that. I don't think that's the most or the most urgent matter. I think that most urgent matter in Brazil is that we have a lot of cases, a lot of people trying to make complaints a lot. I work with that. Now I work with that. And I receive complaints and testimonies every other day, sometimes more than once a day. But usually we can't do anything legally because when the person understands that he or she was a victim of crime, of violence, of abuse, of manipulation, we no longer can make a complaint. Our deadlines to do so are ridiculous. They don't consider the amount of time one needs to understand what happened. And even when you do make a complaint, they will ask you for hard evidence. And by hard evidence, they want videos, photos, documents, and most often you don't document an abuse. You don't have the documents. You don't have that kind of evidence, even though you can have more than a dozen victims saying the same thing. So the most serious thing is we are protecting abusers and we are criminalized victims because we don't want to talk about it. Brazil has to talk about it. That's the first step. The first step, change things in Brazil to make Brazil a safer place to people to pursue any kind of religious or creed or belief they want, is to talk about abusers, to talk about criminals in the religious environment, to acknowledge and accept that many so-called leaders, gurus, coaches, they are nothing but abusers that uses a mask that is very privileged to commit abuse. So the one thing I think that I wanted to tell you, all of you, is that talking about abusers and abusive religious environment in Brazil is tough, is a challenge because I have to I have to start from the beginning, from the very beginning. I have to explain what is an abuse. I have to explain to the judge, to the magistrates, that anyone is vulnerable. Because right now, they don't seem to understand that. So Brazil doesn't talk about it. Brazil is in denial. And we cannot keep denying that abuse happens in religious environment, and that more than often some of those abusers are very famous people with hundreds, thousands of followers. And it doesn't mean that they can't be abusers. It doesn't mean that. It just means that they are very nice. They have a very nice image, and they are very good in convincing people they are good. But we are in Brazil still holding on to a theocratic culture, even though we say we have laicity in our state. Do we know? I don't know. It doesn't feel that way. It feels that the first step in Brazil is to prove that you are a victim. You have to prove that not that you are a victim. It's rougher than that. You have to prove that you can be a victim. And that's hard to prove. When people think that if you have a higher education and um, financial stability and a loving family, that you can't be a victim of a fake guru, a fake religious leader. They don't understand Brazil and our penal code doesn't address that, which is a huge problem too. They don't understand that everyone is vulnerable. So when I say that we have a cultural identity that protects criminals, I say we have to understand that not every so-called religious are actually committed to religion. Some of them just want the safety and the protection and the prayer that makes people more vulnerable. They don't believe on the doctrine. They don't believe. Um, they aren't religious. They aren't religious at all. But let me go back to Icaro, just to finish. Icaro is in jail. He is in jail, but not because he manipulated and he abused psychologically, physically, sexually 30 people. He's in jail because he sexually abused kids. So he's in jail because he's also a pedophile. And that's the kind of man they respect more than 30 victims. They say those victims couldn't be victimized by Icaro. That those 30 people just accepted that it was all consensual. They were burned, they were harassed, sexually abused, they were beaten, and the judge say they weren't manipulated. So that's the environment in Brazil. That's my context. And I'm here much more to tell you what's happening my end than to give some answers. I am still analyzing those 5 cases. Those are very different in the background, but in the end, that's the same process, the same legal process, and the same prejudice. So, yeah, Brazil is protecting criminals and Brazil is protecting criminals and is criminalize victims because Brazil choose to be silent, and you have to break the silence. Thank you.